We will begin. Okay. Very good morning, everybody. My name is Dilam Vavalarachi, and I am a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at the National University of Singapore. I am honored to be your moderator for today's session. Thank you all for joining us for this fourth and final installment of the Future Ready Society Conference Series, Learning Journey 4, Designing Systems that Harness Collective Intelligence. This series is a collaborative effort between the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University for Technology and Design and the Institute of Policy Studies at the National University of Singapore, with the generous support of the Singapore Tote Board. Over the past few months, from June to September this year, we have explored various facets of citizen participation, culminating in an annual conference in October on the theme, The Future of Citizen Participation and Collective Intelligence. So today's session is particularly exciting as we delve into the concept of collective intelligence. At the forefront of citizen participation are innovative forms of participatory governance, which are increasingly recognized as powerful tools for addressing social issues. Traditional participatory processes often involve selected groups of citizens in co-creating solutions. However, open collaboration enabled by collective intelligence broadens the scope of participation, allowing almost anyone with an interest or stake in the issue to contribute. By leveraging technology, we can connect citizens across diverse backgrounds, tapping into their distributed intelligence, varied experiences, and unique perspectives. This inclusive approach not only democratizes decision-making, but also enriches the problem-solving process by incorporating a wider array of ideas and insights. Collective intelligence supports participatory governance by creating platforms where citizens can engage in meaningful dialogue, share knowledge, and collaboratively develop solutions to complex challenges. This shift towards more collaborative and decentralized models of governance empowers individuals and communities, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility for outcomes. The challenge lies in harnessing this vast and diverse resource in a coherent and cumulative way to effectively address complex challenges, ensuring that contributions are integrated and aligned towards common goals is essential for maximizing the potential of collective intelligence in creating more resilient and adaptive solutions to the social issues we face today. Moreover, collective intelligence holds immense potential in tackling complex social problems. By pooling the knowledge, insights, and experiences of a diverse group of individuals, we can generate innovative solutions that might not emerge from a single source. For instance, communities facing issues like urban planning, healthcare accessibility, or environmental sustainability can benefit from collective intelligence by bringing together citizens, experts, and policymakers in a collaborative problem-solving process. This approach not only democratizes decision-making, but also enhances the quality and relevance of solutions, as they are informed by a broader range of perspectives. The power of collective intelligence lies in its ability to turn diversity into a strength, creating solutions that are more robust, inclusive, and adaptable to real-world complexities of complex challenges. To effectively leverage a collective intelligence in solving social issues, it's crucial to understand the potential of socio-technical systems specifically designed for problem solving. So a key question arises in today's context: can artificial intelligence enhance collective intelligence by facilitating better idea generation? So given the complex and multifaceted nature of wicked social problems, generative AI could play a vital role in broadening the range of possibilities considered by human participants. AI can assist in identifying patterns, generating novel ideas, and processing large amounts of information, thereby expanding the collective capacity to address complex challenges. This prompts us to explore how organizations and communities can harness AI to mobilize collective insights and ideas, ultimately solving problems that might be insurmountable for individuals or smaller groups alone. With that in mind, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Mr. Robert Laubach. Robert is the Associate Director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence and an expert on the subject. His work focuses on how the rise of the internet and advancements in AI create new opportunities for organizing work. He is a key member of the team behind Supermind Ideator, a software platform that combines generative AI with a methodology developed by CCI to design more effective human-computer collaborations. Robert has published extensively in academic journals, Harvard Business Review, and Sloan Management Review, and co-edited Inventing the Organizations of the 21st Century, published by MIT Press. He holds an undergraduate degree from Northwestern University and completed a master's degree and doctoral coursework at Harvard. Robert's presentation today is titled, Using Supermind Design and Generative AI to Address Complex Challenges, and we are eager to hear his insights. We are also fortunate to have two distinguished discussants with us who will share their reflections after Robert's presentation. Mr. Steve Lowe, Executive Director of the Lien Center for Social Innovation at the Singapore Management University, and Associate Professor Natalie Pang, who is both an Associate Professor at the Communications and New Media Department and the University Librarian at NUS Libraries, National University of Singapore. For audience members, if you have any questions for Robert or the discussants during the presentations, please feel free to type them in the chat. However, please note that I will only address these questions during the Q&A session at the end. All right, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Robert to the stage. Robert, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Dawn, for that very nice introduction. So I'm going to tell you about collective intelligence as a phenomenon and as a field of study. I'm going to then talk about superminds and supermind design, which is a framework that we've developed to try to design more collectively intelligent groups. And then I'm going to talk about Supermind Ideator, which is a system that we've developed at CCI to combine this framework for designing intelligent computer human groups and using generative AI to augment it. I'll also tell you kind of what we see on the horizon for our work, but I really, that's just very brief. And then if anyone's interested, there at the end, there are a few suggested things if you're interested in drilling down more deeply on some of these topics. So first, what is collective intelligence? This is a nice definition. I mentioned Professor Malone earlier. I like this definition a lot. He says collective intelligence, we have it when you see groups of individuals acting together in ways that seem intelligent. It's a very simple definition. I'd like to unpack a few of the pieces of it. Groups is critical. It's often intelligence as a scientific field has been studied in the context of individual intelligence, and that's yielded some very useful insights. But the focus here is on groups and intelligence of groups. And in order for groups to exhibit intelligence, they do have to act together. They have to cooperate, collaborate in some manner. The last part of the definition, in some ways, is the most interesting, because this concept of intelligence has at certain points been controversial. There are ways it's been used politically, sometimes in not so positive ways, to claim that some groups are more intelligent than others as kind of groups of individuals. There's also controversies about measuring intelligence and are there different kinds of intelligence, but we try to use a very simple definition in our work, which is we define intelligence as an ability to achieve a desired goal. There also are sometimes elements of being able to do this in an environment that's changing and potentially volatile. So there are some connotations of adaptiveness and resilience as well. But I think that the major definition that we're using of intelligence is an ability to achieve a desired goal. So collective intelligence, it's actually been around for a really, really long time. There are some great examples in the animal kingdom. The collective behavior of bees and ants has been studied by scientists for a long time. There's some really interesting ways that the scientists who look at these creatures have come to understand how quite complex behaviors are elicited from actually quite simple signals between the actors. Another interesting group that I really like is schools of fish. They don't do things like build beehives, but they do have very interesting ways of working together as they're swimming and sending signals to each other if there's a predator nearby. The way that the fish that's on the edge of the school signals to the others that it's time to move in another direction is quite interesting. And there's a scientist at Princeton who's done very fascinating work on this. I'm fond of dogs, and so I put a picture of wolves in here. Wolves have actually quite complex social behavior, which allows them to be more effective as hunters. So it's been present in animals for a very long time. The next thing I want to note is that it's been around in human history, since we've evolved on the savannah. Many evolutionary biologists posit that one of the reasons that humans have been so successful evolutionarily is that we have an ability to cooperate at a very high level with each other. And you see ever increasing sizes of cooperation and ever increasing sizes of groups from the small bands in sort of early days to large empires. The first one in the West was Egypt, but similar kinds of civilizations were sprouting in the subcontinent and in China. The symbol on the left is the symbol of the Catholic Church, which actually is a quite interesting organizational structure that evolved to have really a global organizational structure, again, operating with quite simple rules. The other very important collective intelligence phenomenon in modern times, and this is the symbol of the early days of General Motors, the large corporation. Many of us don't realize this, but the large corporation, which is such a big part of most of our lives today, really is a phenomenon of the last several hundred years. These big organizations that marshaled tens or even hundreds of thousands of people simply didn't exist before. Most enterprises were small, operating on a shoestring, and much of economic activity was mediated by exchanges between these small organizations. So the large corporation is a huge part of the story of collective intelligence. Anyway, so I've just told you that it's been around for, like since before history was recorded. Why would Professor Malone and his colleagues form a Center for Collective Intelligence in 2009? And I mentioned this actually when Dylan and I were talking earlier. There were some new things that emerged with the rise of the internet that were different and really interesting, and a couple of things that we saw. They were larger and the scale of them, and they were truly global. And the other thing that was quite fascinating was that there were different ways that groups were engaging with each other. Many large organizations before then were based on the idea that you had a full-time position at an organization and you worked your work hours. But many of these internet-based collective intelligence systems were based on people just contributing little tiny bits, and then all of those little tiny bits got aggregated into a larger whole. There also were people who were doing things not because they were getting paid, but because they believed in contributing to a mission, or they enjoyed doing the work. So let's tell you about some examples. Wikipedia is well known, but I'm not sure everyone knows the story of how it really happens. It's basically, we all use it, I think, in modern life, but it's basically done by volunteers working for free, using a set of rules that evolved over, the years as the group that was committed to working on it figured out how to work together. So it's quite a remarkable achievement, and it was founded in 2001, and by the 2005, Nature published an article which compared articles in scientific disciplines between Wikipedia and Encyclopedia Britannica, which until then had been the gold standard. And they found that the Wikipedia articles had become comparable in quality to the Britannica articles. Now, it's not perfect. There are some examples of people putting in hoaxes and them being picked up, but it's pretty darn amazing what they've done. Basically, people working as volunteers. Another area where people work as volunteers is open source software. The penguin is the Linux symbol, and the feather is for Apache, which is an open source tool used in many web servers. Citizen science is another amazing open collective intelligence kind of thing enabled by the internet. Folded is an online game that invites people to come and try to fold proteins. This is something that is very important for biomedical research. And they found that some of these games could help to crack protein solving problems that had eluded scientists for years. Molfar is an example of collective sensing. There are a lot of examples of collective sensing. There's a lot of that being done in citizen science, but open source intelligence is actually where people go online and attempt to gather data about military conflict or military issues. And so Molfar is quite active in the conflict in Ukraine. A couple of other examples. Crowd prediction is something else that we saw emerging. The first wave of this was prediction markets, where people bought and sold predictions using sometimes real money. Another super interesting example is the Good Judgment Project, which was a project that emerged out of the failures of intelligence after September 11th. And the US intelligence community engaged a number of academics, and Good Judgment Project emerged as the approach that was the most successful. Another example, innovation contests. There are many of these. Netflix was looking for a better algorithm to match its movies with its customers. They offered $1 million prize, and they got the improvements that they were looking for. And then online labor markets are also super interesting. Upwork is a place where you can post projects that you want done, and people will bid to complete them. Amazon Mechanical Turk is a platform that Amazon developed to do small tasks on its own website, and then it now offers it to the global community of people who are interested. You can offer small amounts of money, $1 for a few minutes of work, or $10 for participating in a science experiment. So these are all examples of web-enabled collective intelligence. Some of the things that we're getting here are quite interesting. I mentioned before that people often do these things out of they enjoy the work. They enjoy doing the activity. That's certainly the case with Wikipedia and open source software. The scholar of the internet, Clay Shirky's, called this tapping the cognitive surplus. Instead of people sitting around, watching television as they did before, maybe they're going to work on a Wikipedia article that they're interested in. Wisdom of the crowds is another phenomenon that we observe. This diagram here is from a paper published by Francis Galton, a British scientist in the early 20th century. He was attending a county fair in England, and he invited people to guess the weight of a prize oxen who was being featured at this county fair. And the line, the graph shows the range of the the estimates, what's most interesting is that the average of all the estimates was almost exactly the proper weight. So there's a way that in some situations, some quite specific situations, if you poll a large group, the errors kind of cancel each other out, and the crowd is wiser than any one individual, except maybe for this, one person at the middle of the graph who had the right number. But finding that person is not always so easy. And then the other thing that's quite interesting is that some of these collective intelligence systems can allow you to identify quite unique, distinctive talent. And NASA has had a lot of luck with some innovation contests that they've run, where they found people who could do quite remarkable things, such as designing the array of solar panels on space satellites. So there's some really interesting stuff. What we decided to do with CCI was going to go back a little bit and just note what we're trying to do. I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you verbally that we do three kinds of work. We are doing experimental science to try to identify some of the underlying qualities that make groups smarter or more or less smart. We're gathering case examples of novel collective intelligence, and we're also trying to create systems that embody collective intelligence. And I'll just tell you about one of each of those. In the experimental area, we actually did a study where we tried to develop an instrument to measure the intelligence of groups. And we found that there was a way that you could do this by administering kind of the equivalent of an intelligence quotient test that the group would perform. And we also found some things that led to greater or worse performance. One interesting element was that the more that the group communicated with each other, the higher the performance was. We did another project where we looked at a bunch of case examples, about 100 case examples, and we mapped some of the patterns. We called that study the genome of collective intelligence. It was very early, very focused on crowdsourcing platforms, because that was kind of the mode of the moment. And then we also built a very large crowdsourcing system. This is the engineering side, that was called the Climate Colab, where we tried to create a global community of people who would contribute ideas about what to do about particular aspects of climate change. And we were able to attract a community of about 100,000 people who were participating, and we feel like we got some very good ideas. The challenge when we did the project was we think we got good ideas, but the established mechanisms to get them implemented were harder for us to access. We worked with the United Nations some, we worked with the US government some, we tried to work with governments in other countries, but it proved quite challenging to get people who were in positions of authority to listen to ideas that had come from an online crowd. So that was an interesting experience. Anyway, out of that, I want to now shift from collective intelligence to superminds and supermind design. So coming back to a definition that also comes from Professor Malone, supermind, by that term we mean powerful combination of many minds, and these can be minds of the kind of biological kind or the silicon kind. So we're including people and computers here. And the word supermind is somewhat borrowed from a concept in biology called superorganism, which is like an ant colony or a beehive is known as a superorganism. Many individual beings, many individual organisms making a kind of a larger whole. And we think this is an interesting way to think about collective intelligence, because when you use the word collective intelligence, you're focusing on the entity you're kind of examining, intelligence. But when you talk about superminds, you're actually talking about the entity that's the entity that's embodying it, that's actually making it happen. And as I mentioned before, I mean, most superminds have evolved over time, trial and error, evolutionary adaptation to the environment. But as we began to think about superminds and we began to observe, we thought, well, is there a way that we could develop some techniques to get them to happen more faster and more systematically. And so Supermind Design was something we tried to figure out how to do. So it's like the field of organization design, which is something that's very widely known in management schools and in large companies. It often, the kind of stereotypical vision of organization design is you have a org chart with business units or with functional units, and you're moving them around and you're moving people from one to the other. And there's certainly are some elements of that, but we like to expand the definition of org design here to mean more than just traditional hierarchical organizations, but also some of these newer forms of collaboration like crowdsourcing. And we also like to focus not just on the organization of the people and the lines of authority in a traditional organization, but also how are people and computers working together? How are the computers and the people talking, quote unquote, to each other? So anyway, as we began to evolve this, our thinking in this framework of Supermind design, we were very influenced by design thinking, which is very influential. And I understand that you heard from the Nesta that they had an earlier session from some of the Nesta folks, and they've done very good work on that and on design. We kind of have a process where we try to define the problem more precisely and more effectively. We then generate potential designs to address the problem, and then we try to evaluate those designs. But in this talk, I'm just going to focus mainly on the middle one. How do we surface ideas about potential Supermind designs, Supermind configurations? So what we developed was what we called moves. And it's a little more comprehensible when it gets concrete, but basically you start with either your existing way of doing things, or you start with a prototype. You have an idea and you have kind of a rough idea. And then you apply these moves, which change one element. So you first change one element, and then you get to another place, and you say, okay, well, maybe I'll use this other move to change another element. And you do this over and over again successively. And in some ways, what this is doing is it's allowing you to explore the design space of possibilities. And again, this will become more concrete when I show you some of the moves. But we think that this can allow you to maybe surface some things that you wouldn't have if you had just been brainstorming in an unstructured way. So what are these moves? Well, there's basic ones which are pretty common to many design approaches. Zoom out, you sort of take a step back and you say, okay, we're trying to accomplish something here. What's the larger system this is a part of? Zoom in is when you look more close, you kind of drill down on the sub-activities, the very specific pieces you have to accomplish to get the goal done. And then you also do analogies. You find other domains where you can find examples that might spur some creative thinking. I know for a while there, not so much anymore, but there was a while there where every time we did a design session with our Supermind design, people would say, well, what if we had the Uber of, X? Uber was very popular at the time. Uber was a way of kind of changing, the way something got done by eliciting, a lot of new entrants to come in and participate in the activity. So that's an example of an analogy. Okay, so those are the basic ones. Then these are more informed by Supermind research, our collective intelligence research. We found that if you focus on particular cognitive processes that might have leverage, you can maybe make some headway. We also look at whether you could maybe, instead of the traditional way that most org design approaches have thought about decision making, is that they assign decisions at varying levels of authority to people in the organization in a hierarchical way. But there are actually some group decision mechanisms that can be quite interesting. And then, of course, technology. Can you apply technology? So to give you a more concrete sense of this, I just want to show you, I can't get into the full details here, but the cognitive process is to do any action, you have to kind of create a set of options that you could consider. You have to decide which ones. You want to then, once you take action, you want to remember what happened. In order to even create options, you have to sense your environment. I'm not doing this in the optimal order here, but these are all elements that that are cognitive processes that are involved in any activity that you're trying to undertake. You also want to, do kind of after action, after you try something out, you want to internalize what lessons you maybe learned and then feed those back in. So there's a loop here of cognitive processes that is typically present in any activity. And if you can maybe identify one or several where you think you might want to look more closely and look at some alternatives, this can be a fruitful way of getting some interesting alternative ideas. And then the decision making, I'm just going to quickly go through this, but hierarchy, as I mentioned, is kind of the default that many organizations go to. And that's actually very useful. And I don't think we should be always down on hierarchies. It creates, it can be faster. It can create a way of making sure that people with appropriate levels of experience and expertise are making important decisions. But that's not the only way. Democracies are predicated on the idea that if we go broad and we get input from everyone that's in the group, then we might be wiser. So democracies and voting can be a powerful mechanism. Using market mechanisms, where the decisions get made basically based on individual buying and selling and making agreements with each other, but that's it. And then the price is defined by that, or in the case of prediction markets, the predictions probability is defined by that. So markets can be very interesting and important. Communities are also potentially very powerful mechanisms for making decisions. And what happens in communities is typically there are a set of shared norms and then also people care about having a reputation within the community. And so they will abide by the norms, and they will also try to do the right thing by their other community members. And what often happens in these kinds of settings is a rough consensus emerges, and that can be an interesting and valuable way to make decisions. The last one, ecosystem, is kind of the default. It sort of is when there's no one of these mechanisms predominates, and it's kind of a power struggle between the different players trying to vie for supremacy. And there actually are many settings where this is the case. Maybe not a design tool, but sometimes recognizing that an ecosystem maybe is the best that you can do, and understanding that that's what's going on can be useful and helpful. So that's the group decision making and groupify. And then finally, technify. There's so many technologies out there now. One important one, top left, is just the connectivity that the internet enables, and taking advantage of that can be incredibly powerful. I mentioned before microtasks and matching people to tasks. Those are some things that can be done with technical solutions by creating platforms that can do those things. Generative AI is huge. And then there are sort of many subcategories. We could go on and on, but technology is clearly a big part of the story. So let me give you an example of how we applied Supermind Design. So we were working with a Japanese company that wanted to explore some new ways to address, it was a Japanese company, and they wanted to think about new ways to address the challenge of depression in Japan. And so they started with the way it's done now, which is typically a patient will go to a doctor and the doctor will diagnose. So that seemed like it was not working as well as everyone would have hoped. There were a lot of reasons for that. There was a large stigma to acknowledging depression in Japan. And so we sort of zoomed out and said, well, let's go broader than just the individual doctor. Maybe the doctor's office can play a role in doing the diagnosis. In other words, maybe the receptionist, maybe the nurse, maybe others can be sort of clued in to say, keep an eye out on these signs. So that got us then thinking, well, maybe it's not just the doctor's office, but maybe there's like the whole healthcare system and the pharmacy and the insurance companies, and there may be a larger group. And so let's even go beyond the healthcare system and go to society as a whole. Can the society as a whole? Well, that was a little too broad. So let's get a little bit more fine-grained and think about, well, can communities play a role in diagnosing depression? And from that, we then went from, and actually that seemed kind of promising, you know, your sort of circle of friends and acquaintances might actually have a sense of, oh, you know, this person's been seeming a little down. So we then said, well, there actually are these, you know, phenomena where members of communities talk to each other and write down messages to each other in social networks. Could online social networks and some of the content that's present there be used to do this diagnosis? And then finally, you know, the thing that came out of that was, well, actually, there may be some ways that machine learning could, you know, be used to find some of the patterns associated with social media posts of people who are depressed. And so that became kind of an idea that then they began to explore and looked into whether they could make that be something that they could field. I don't believe that they did end up doing that. We kind of lost touch with them after we did this project with them. But a few months ago, I was, you know, I saw this on the internet. So 2019, we did this work with this pharma company and came up with this idea. And in fact, 5 years later, there are actually systems that seem much like what came out of that Supermind design session are now being fielded by startup companies. So it wasn't entirely, you know, crazy to kind of use that structured approach. Now, we did this in a series of workshops with lots of people in the company, with a skilled facilitator applying some of these ideas. So it was a long, laborious process, but it did, you know, come up with an idea that seemed to have some traction. So now we have this more recent phenomenon of generative AI. So generative AI made a big splash in 2023 with the launching of ChatGPT. And the underlying technology behind ChatGPT is large language models. And actually, a good while before ChatGPT got launched, we were thinking about, could these large language models be a partner to designers? So instead of having to get a facilitator and a bunch of people from the company brainstorming together using Supermind design moves, could we in fact embed these moves in prompts to the large language models? And so we started to try to do that, and out of this came a platform that we call Supermind Ideator. So it uses OpenAI, which is one of the, well, probably the first large language model that got a lot of traction, but there now are others that have been created by other large tech firms. Google has one, Amazon has one, and they have slightly different characteristics, but we've been working with OpenAI's GPT-3 and 4. And, you know, we had to learn how to talk to it. We had to learn how to write the prompts that would embody the Supermind design concepts. And it wasn't, you know, there was some learning curve, definitely. And then we also found some different ways that you can use the LLMs. You can feed it some examples, which is called fine tuning. You can just ask it to do it on its own. There's lots of different approaches, but we worked on this for a good while, and about 18 months ago, we launched this first version of our tool called Supermind Ideator. And it has kind of a couple of ways that you can engage. And I'll show you kind of in more concrete ways, but there are a couple of basic things you can do. You can invite it to explore your problem, and it gives you some ideas on how you might think about your problem in a different sort of way. And then it also, if you select explore solutions, it gives you some possible ideas for ways you could address the problem. We also allow people to select individual Supermind moves using the advanced mode. So let me just show you the UI, and then I'll show you some outputs, some sample outputs. So the UI, you've got your left-hand toolbar where you type in your problem statement in the upper left. I want to ... and you say what you want to do. And then you can, the three primary options are explore problem, explore solution, and then for advanced, you have to click on more choices, and then you can choose one of the Supermind moves. And then what happens is you get a range of outputs. When you get explore problem, you get 5 or 6 outputs. When you do explore solution, you get 5 or 6 outputs. And I can show you some examples. So let me go from my quickly to my browser and show you what I got from just a few minutes of working with Supermind Ideator. Okay, so I typed in, I want to help Singapore become a smarter city. I thought that was a pretty evergreen, high-level thing to do. And I chose explore problem, explore solution, and then I chose one of the advanced moves, analogize. So I clicked on basic, I selected, you have all these options. I selected analogize and I clicked it. And so I'll show you the results. Okay, so here's explore problem. And these large language models tend to give you long lists of a lot of stuff, and they're very comprehensive, which can be nice because you sometimes, as a human, I think you have evolved to think very quickly in size of situations very quickly and select the most important item. These large language models are very good at remembering everything. So this is kind of a comprehensive list of maybe some of the elements of the smart city work that you might want to look into. Excuse me. And I didn't find this to be particularly creative, but it's kind of comprehensive. And then similarly, this is just sort of a repetition of some of the same things we just saw. Urban infrastructure is kind of the zoom out, zoom outs of 2 different kinds. The analogies I thought a little more interesting. Gardening. So in other words, a smart city, think of a smart city as being like a digital garden that you have to cultivate. Smart home, I thought that was kind of interesting. And then what am I missing? Some of these things are pretty interesting too, I think. I always find these to be useful. But anyway, that helps you to think about your problem. Okay, then I clicked on explore solution and it gave me some ideas. And again, some, okay, so here's explore solution. So here's some ideas about how you can maybe use market mechanisms, dynamic pricing for utilities and transport services, not so new, but maybe something you hadn't thought of. Here's another, I don't quite understand this one, but it seems as though market mechanisms are somehow being used with AI for traffic flow. Community mechanisms is another thing. Democratic decision made. So it gives you a series of ideas. The most interesting thing that I found here was we created for this tool a database of interesting examples. And here's an example of an initiative in Belgium. And it gives a pretty detailed description of that initiative, and it also explains why it might be relevant. So this is this database of interesting superminds, which we call the Supermind Design Library, actually could be something that could be of value. And if you like that, you could actually say, that's kind of cool. I'd like to run this one again. So you get a new Supermind Design Library idea if you think that's kind of promising. Finally, I did, my last thing that I did was, let's see. My analogy disappeared. Okay, well, I'm going to try to do an analogy right now. So I'm going to invite it to generate an analogy. Here it is. Here's the other analogy. So here, when I did analogize before, sorry, I just got a little bit confused by the UI. So when I did analogy before, I like analogies myself. That's just me. So ants building an ant colony. Well, that was kind of interesting and unusual to me. Or bees pollinating flowers. These other ones had already kind of been shown, but these were different ones. And you could do it again and again and again. So the idea here is not, this is basically like 5 minutes of putting something in and then seeing what it gave me. But what you can do is you can use this and select the best things, and then you can drill down more deeply and you can get more into it. And it's just a starting point. And then what you really want to do then is you want to take these ideas and try them out with people who actually understand what is the nature of the problem. So it's just a starting point. It's not giving you answers, but we hope that it's giving you maybe some ideas that will allow you to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more innovative in your thinking. So that's Ideator. We have done a couple of experiments testing out whether this is actually doing anything good. And we find that it seems like it helps. So one study, we recruited many people on a platform called Prolific, a crowd work platform that's used often by social science experimenters. And we had them working in 3 ways, coming up with ideas to solve a problem. The problem was matching employers with workers in more effective ways. And we had 1/3 working on their own, 1/3 who had ChatGPT, and 1/3 had Ideator. So they created 600 ideas, about 4 each on average. And these were evaluated by 500 other subjects that we recruited on the same platform. And we found that the ideas created by Ideator seemed to be rated slightly better. 3.2 on a 1 to 5 scale versus 3.0 for ChatGPT and 2.8 for people working on their own. So that's interesting. And there's some other interesting things, like if they engaged with the platform more, with Ideator more, the results were better. So there's some really interesting stuff. And there's a paper on this, which I have at the end, if you want to dig in more. Another pilot study that we did with the professional services firm, we recruited about 30 of their mid-level staff folks and working under the same 3 conditions. And they were not statistically significant, but it was pretty interesting. So the people who had Ideator gave us many more ideas, which is a good thing in an innovation setting, because you are often, when you're doing innovation, if you have more ideas, you tend to get better outcomes. And then the most interesting thing was we looked at the top 25 ideas, and 19 of the top 25 ideas were generated by people who were working with Ideator, or interestingly, with Ideator operating just on its own. So we're hoping now to do a larger scale study with this same company and to validate this with some results that are statistically robust. So finally, where are we going from there? We're hoping to continue working on Ideator. And the next sort of frontier with Ideator at the moment is we're hoping to create extensions. So the way that it works now is you kind of put in one thing and you get a bunch of stuff, and then you can interact with it. But what we're hoping we can maybe do is allow it to recommend and take you through a pathway that'll lead you to the way that maybe like a facilitator in a design thinking workshop might take you through a design thinking exercise. So we're trying both kind of versions of the interface that you just saw, and also a chat interface. So that's one direction we're going, is kind of extending Ideator. Another idea is that we're actually seeing whether you could use the language models to evaluate the outputs. And we're finding that, in fact, we are able to get pretty close to the ratings that we got from the professional services firm by using the large language model. So in other words, when we did that study with the professional services firm, we had, like professionals rating the ideas, not just like random people recruited on a crowdsourcing site. But so we feel like those are pretty good ratings. And if we can get an LLM to approximate ratings of professionals of the innovativeness of ideas, that's pretty interesting and potentially very powerful. We could actually have the LLM generate the ideas and then have the LLM rate the ideas and then only output the most interesting and innovative ones. We're also working on a project that we call Ontology of Collective Intelligence, where we're trying to develop something like the ontology of living beings that was created by the biologist Linnaeus, where birds are classified in one area and mammals in another, and then within mammals there are primates and there are the wolf family. And what we would like to do is to say, well, there actually maybe are tasks that can be classified in this kind of way. And if we're able to do this and then build tools on top of it, we think that you might be able to, almost do like Ideator on steroids, where you could put in your problem and then indicate what realm you're in, what collective intelligence domain you're in, and then the tools that are associated with this ontology could actually really quickly recommend options and maybe even evaluate them. I mean, it's a very ambitious project, but we're very excited about it. And we're very excited also to be working with both getting funding from Singapore's National Research Foundation as part of a large MIT project, and also working with several partners in Singapore. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to point you to a couple of things if you want to dive in more fully. Tom Malone's book, Superminds, is a great overview of collective intelligence. The Supermind Design methodology is articulated nicely in the Supermind Design Primer. If you're interested in Supermind Ideator, you can go to the page, to the link, and then if you're interested in signing up, you can sign up. And then if you'd like me to put you to the head of the queue, if you'd really like to get at it right away, send me an email and I can put you at the head of the queue. And then finally, this paper at the very end here is something that was just presented at the Collective Intelligence Conference, and it describes that first research study that I told you about, where we had people creating ideas under the 3 different treatments, working solo, working with ChatGPT, and working with Ideator. And it describes the results in much more detail than I was able to describe. So I'm at minute 42, and I think I'm getting a scratch in my throat, and I think we started a little late. So I think I'm going to sign off now, and I'm very excited to hear what the discussants' thoughts are.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that illuminating presentation. Given that so many people in the audience, are civil servants and practitioners who don't necessarily have a background in collective intelligence, was really, really useful and helpful to have that overview of the concept of collective intelligence, because I don't think that's necessarily something that a lot of people have a sense of what it is. And I really appreciated the sort of journey of Supermind Design and then Supermind Ideator, and thank you for taking us through an example of how to use the Ideator that was really useful in understanding the links, I guess, to design thinking and seeing the connection there. So myself, I did teach a module called Social Innovation at the Tembusu College at the National University of Singapore. And when I taught that, one of the primary assignments for this module was for students to come up with a social innovation, an idea that solves a complex issue. And the biggest bottleneck that students have is coming up with several ideas for them to sort of, bounce off of, or even to talk to others in class, or to combine, or to work off on. And I think that something like the Superman Ideator would have been game-changing. So it's really, really amazing to hear about this work. And I think the applications for it are really endless. So with that, I just want to pause and invite our first discussant, Steve. So Steve is from the Lien Center for Social Innovation, and the Lien for social innovation fosters strategic collaborations across public, private, and social sectors to co-create lasting solutions for positive social change. So Steve, thank you for taking the time to do this. Could you please introduce yourself and share your thoughts with us?
Very good morning to everyone. And thank you, Robert, for such a insightful and mind-blowing talk. I think it's really expanded my thinking. I love the idea of collective intelligence. For those of us who have been in the media for a long time, one of the reasons we entered the media was to actually gather collective intelligence, collective feedback, collective responses to society. And I'm talking about 20, 30 years ago. And that was the idea that we in a democracy could come up with some of the most complex solutions to even more complex problems. And at the Lian Center at Singapore Management University, we are very focused in this season on inequality. And in my own background, we've been working very closely with the poor in Singapore, but also in the region. And in my background, being in the charity world for almost a couple of decades, we've worked with the ultra poor in third world countries and the most far-flung places on the earth, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. And we've come across a study, and it's not a validated study, so I need to justify that, but based on some good research and good anecdotal evidence and some of my own life experience in the work, we've discovered that amongst the ultra poor and the very low income, there's a real strength when there's a peer, not just accountability, but a peer group of collective problem solving. Now, the people I'm talking about don't even have a laptop. But we found evidence, and the evidence is growing, and we're moving into it, that when we talk about assets-based community development, uplifting the poor, one of the things that I think we forget, that one of the key assets is their own intelligence and life experience of the very people we're trying to help. And we also came across a study just yesterday, actually, that studied the relationship between social workers and trainers and people like me who work in charities, who go into the low income areas, and the trainers, the education level of the trainers. And we found that the higher the education level of the trainer, the greater the contrast between the trainers and the, if you like, the beneficiaries, had an inverse relationship on how effective some of the programs that we rolled out. For example, if we come from the first world, we come into a third world situation and we say, okay, these are ideas, these are concepts, this is what we think is good for you, why don't you try these? We actually found that not to be entirely effective. Of course, there were some good programs. What we did find was when we created a facility for collective intelligence, gathered the community, understanding that one of the key assets is ideas and solutioning, we actually saw much better results. So what I would love to see is something like this, with the help of AI, with the help of technology, and maybe an adjusted software system or platform that could be used with a just a mobile phone, that we gather these ultra poor, who, by the way, have phones.
I know. We learned that in our climate change project. Yeah.
Amazing, right? Yeah. And we get them together and let's solve your complex problems, where we have tried from the first world with all our academia and background research, but you guys know some of the solutions. And if you could come together on this platform and tackle some of these real complex, systemic, intergenerational issues, I would love to see that happen. So those are my quick thoughts, taking the lens of working in inequality and working with the ultra poor.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was really great to hear about, the idea of asset-based community development and thinking about leveraging on the expertise of the vulnerable people that, a lot of these projects hope to serve. So including them and empowering them to be a part of the process, I think that's really important. Before we move on to Natalie, I was wondering, Robert, do you have anything you'd like to respond to Steve's comments with?
Well, I'm hearing Steve say he wants to see the stripped down mobile version that he can field in these settings, and that's a great idea. And I'm going to talk to our software team and get them at least thinking about that, because I think that's amazing. I also do remember many of the best solutions that came from our climate change project, which included a number of university researchers, but there were these amazing kind of local projects that had emerged from the grassroots, from people who were dealing with crop issues, or so I have a little bit of a sense from that experience of what you're describing about people getting together and working together. And if we could figure out a way that we could facilitate, inject AI into that to help that, work better, that would be really cool. So I'm going to talk to my colleagues about that. So thanks for that. I love that idea.
Fantastic. And once you get it going, please let us know. We're actually running a pilot right here in Singapore with the Food Insecure House. And one of the differences in this pilot, it is actually peer driven. That is to say, those who have got themselves out of poverty or food insecurity in Singapore are coming together with their peers to try and drive solutioning. And if you've got something that you can put on a little mobile phone, give me a call.
Yeah. I mean, there also was an interesting, that reminds me of, we worked with another Supermind Design project, which was a health clinic in a developing country. And there was one of the solutions that came out was kind of peer support for people to, maintain adherence to their drug regimes, and to, help out with childcare if they had a doctor's appointment. And that, so the peer-based solution emerged from that small exercise as a potentially very powerful one. So super interesting to hear. And so we don't have a very big team, so I can't promise anything, but I really want to try to pursue that idea.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you. All right. So I'm now really pleased to invite our second discussant, Natalie, to share her reflections. So Natalie has led important research on digital inclusion and access in Singapore. And so we'd love to hear your perspective on the role of artificial intelligence in augmenting collective intelligence. Natalie, would you like to introduce yourself and offer your thoughts, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dilam. And thank you so much, Robert, for the talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It brings me back, brings fond memories of the time when I was studying the internet in the 1990s. I would like to, I guess, as an academic, maybe I will raise more questions than answers. So, but I'd like to raise two. It's so fascinating. In your early part of your talk, you talked about Wikipedia. And I recall the critic, back then, I think this must be the sort of the dawn of the Web 2.0 sort of evolution of the internet. Several books were written, including Clay Shirky's Here Comes Everybody. And then Wikipedia was also quite often cited as one example of the wisdom of the crowd. And I recall one of the key critics of a collective intelligence, or just this idea of wisdom of the crowd, was also this sense that, we no longer rely on expert knowledge. I mean, some of the sharpest critics of that approach then raise this notion that we are now talking about quote unquote amateurish knowledge. And I recall that, one of Wikipedia's response was then, well, you could see what are the edits, who are editing, right? And through those edits, there's some sense of transparency in terms of who and how the knowledge that's contained in Wikipedia pages are being shaped, are being edited, and by who. And there's also this sense that the community will correct misinformation, false information, and so on. Fast forward to today, right? I wonder how, I wonder how this such transparency, such sense of actually we know how knowledge native AI. And I thought that's really something that perhaps we could discuss as a panel as well. From the media and communications field, right, there's also this concept called source credibility, which means that we believe and also act on information because we know what the source is, right? And I think that concept is very aligned with what I'm thinking about now, right? As inspired by your talk, do we know what are the sources, right? Who is the community and how knowledge is being shaped? In many ways, I see this current context of generative AI as something that is not just emerging, but it will become almost like Google, right? Almost like Google in our daily lives. It will become quite synonymous with how we use the internet. Maybe not even 1 year from now. Yeah, it's already happening now. So how do we then process and act on information and fundamentally trust information that's actually being generated? So I think that's one question I like to raise and for us to talk about. My second question has to do with some of my work with at fringe or marginalized communities. This is really related to this concept that of small worlds, right? Which means that in such communities, information is contained within the community, and there are certain norms guiding how that community would accept, right? And also curate such information. So I really think that it's fascinating to think about potentially, say for instance, Supermind Gen Ideator as something that will be introduced to such communities. So how do we actually think about community norms in that context, right? And to a certain extent, I think this notion of community is also fascinating to think about, right? Because technology in many ways, to me, doesn't just replicate a community, it extends it and it gives it new characteristics and attributes as well. So how will such community in a context where there is generative AI, right, within its midst, what would such a community look like? So those are my two thoughts, right? Is there a small world or is it like a hybrid world where the technology, right, in this case, Supermind Generator, acts like a community node in a sense, right? It's non-human, but it is an entity that is shaping the very norms in a community. And what will such norms be like? So happy to discuss this later in a panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Robert, would you like to chime in?
Well, I mean, that's a very powerful set of comments, I think. I would say that, I mean, I think there's implicitly in Natalie's comments, there's a little bit of a reminder that, you know, and this is something that, you know, I'm aware of as someone who started working on internet stuff in the 90s when there were these high hopes for how great it was going to make everything. And, you know, we certainly have seen that it's not been unalloyedly positive, you know. And I think Natalie's comments are reminding us that, you know, there has been, I think, a decline in sort of trust and authority and this is definitely, technologically mediated. And I think there is I mean, you kind of were putting a positive spin on communities in your second comment, but there are also ways that communities can become, online communities can become very insular and reinforcing of angry, resentful, rancorous kinds of sort of ideas. And so I think, we in our work are trying to identify ways that, these tools can be kind of used in positive, designing new systems that can be, we hope addressing these issues. But, one of the issues that needs to be addressed is, technology has had some negative effects, I think. The internet is not unalloyedly good. We don't have just wisdom of crowds. We sometimes have folly of crowds. So I think she's making a very powerful point that, and I do think that we sometimes get a little bit carried away with our high hopes for building new tools. I think technologists tend to get that way more than people who are working in community settings or people who are maybe sort of studying from a more dispassionate perspective the internet. I think we get very excited about the possibilities still, even 30 years on, with the technology hopefulness. But I think Natalie's pointing out that there are some real issues. And even when one last point, someone said to us, after they saw Ideator, well, how are you sure that it's not going to get in the hands of somebody who wants to do really bad things and will use your tool to like design a really organization that's trying to do really bad things? And it hadn't even occurred to us. So I think Natalie is reminding us that we maybe need to be more thoughtful about building in safeguards, building in or anticipating potential for failure modes or anticipating potential pernicious uses. And I think that's a very, very valuable, input, and something that, we in our work need to really keep in mind. So, I mean, I hope I'm not shading it. I think you were doing a very nice job of saying it in as positive a way as possible. And I think I was maybe taking it and running it. I hope I didn't run too far in the negative direction, but I think you're pointing out some very important points about the impact of technology. And we're, in our daily life, and there actually are people, just all that being said, there are some people doing very interesting work on things like disinformation on social media at MIT who are thinking very hard about these things. And they're right, they're right near us. It's just that we're kind of running down this path of trying to build these tools. But I think we need to sort of attend to these things very, maybe more than we are.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I definitely think that the time is now. I wouldn't call them negative effects. I would describe them as unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's
Right,
a more
quite
positive.
often. Yeah, so I think that the time is really now to actually work together, both the technologies and humanists, especially in terms of thinking through what implementation in communities look like.
Yeah, no, that's a much better framing, unintended consequences. That's very good. And also, just to follow up on what you said, I mean, these tools are extremely powerful.
Yes.
I mean, there is a little element of, in the movie Oppenheimer, when the atom bomb blows up and they're kind of like, what have we done here? I mean, there is sometimes, and I have two children who are trying to make careers in creative fields, where in one case, my son's work has definitely been negatively affected by ChatGPT. So there's that whole other thing. There's that whole sort of employment, and so there's a whole range of issues, which I think, Natalie, you're giving me a good reminder that we need to keep those front and center.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we're at can maybe open the floor for questions from the audience. So at this point, you can pose your questions to Robert. You can also pose your questions to any of the discussants. We hope to have a conversation here about the topic. And I already have, I see a question in the chat, but feel free to also raise your hand, turn on your video, or keep it off and ask a question directly as well. So thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, let's begin with taking some audience questions. So maybe before I ask the first audience question, I will just pose one myself to Robert. Something that you mentioned in the case study of the project coming up with this idea to, I guess, the implementation, the not being able to implement it. Like, could you share a little bit more about, I guess, some barriers that is sometimes encountered with the adoption of some of these ideas?
I mean, that's a really great question. I think in any innovation, like in a startup company, social innovation, I think that, adoption is a huge challenge. Unfortunately, on that particular instance, we did not stay in touch with the organization. As often happens in organizations, they had a reorganization. And our friends were kind of like moved to another group and had other responsibilities. And so we never were able to follow through. But even in our preliminary conversations with them, they cited things like cultural barriers, regulatory barriers, organizational inertia in the system, in the healthcare system, which are, I think, probably anyone who's worked in the space of social innovation, those are probably fairly familiar. Government, regulatory barriers, hidebound organizations that have a difficult time changing, hidebound institutions. So I think that they were hoping to go to their, corporate leaders and pitch this idea and then get some partners working with them on it. And we should follow up and actually find out more, if it did get any traction. But I think that the barriers that they encountered were ones that sound familiar to me, not unlike the ones that we encountered when we did our climate change project, which was, we had an innovative approach to generating ideas. We think some of the ideas were actually quite interesting. Some people did think they were quite, I guess one thing that we did find was that we were able to get more traction at local scale. So we worked with several cities and we worked with several companies. And I think we got much better uptake from our ideas when we had, so I guess what I would say is when you're trying to apply collective intelligence, being able to do it at a scale that's maybe not at the very largest, but at a more local scale, you could have maybe a little more success. At least that's been our experience. And I would also defer to, I would be very interested in, because we have been building tools and trying to apply our tools that enhance collective intelligence. And then part of our work has been to try to get them adopted. But I would say that more of our work has been about building the tools. And so I think there probably is a lot of wisdom in this crowd that is gathered around this Zoom, window, who can maybe talk about like just more generally barriers to adoption. We had better luck when we had a existing partner who was committed to taking our idea forward. And then we gave them the idea and then they took it forward. So maybe that's the one lesson that we learned from our climate change project. But anyway, I'd be very interested if any others, if Steve or if Natalie or any other participants have thoughts on that issue, because I think that, it's not, trying to make a system that's more collectively intelligent is not that different than trying to make any kind of intervention in any kind of a system. So there's probably, you know, some evergreen lessons that some people who have experience in social innovation could share. So I don't know if anybody wants to put their hand up.
Justin.
I had my hand up just to ask a question. Thanks, Robert. It was fascinating to hear that you had an ability to evaluate the quality of the solutions and the ideas, because it seemed to me that many of the ideas in the social space, at least, depends on values or ideology. So one person's good idea would be terrible to another person. And I wondered how you managed to evaluate the quality of those solutions.
That is a great point. I mean, I think that there's kind of a, you know, values are kind of about what are your goals and are you aligned on your goals? And then the other side of it is, you know, are you going to achieve the goals? And so to some extent, implicit in our problem statement that we were using, it was that there was kind of alignment on a goal, and the values question was kind of solved already. In this case, it was, can you more effectively, you know, match employers and workers by using clever algorithms or putting in place processes that, you know, are marshaling maybe, you know, people outside of the traditional usual suspects. So that was that there was a agreed upon goal. I think in social innovation, one of the really hard challenges is, you know, even getting people to agree on what we're trying to get accomplished is a big part of the challenge. You know, that's why social innovation, that they have this, you know, there's a literature on what they call wicked problems, which are ones where, you know, we can't even agree on what the problem is. And I think that the values thing makes social innovation maybe so much harder. So I would say that in our case, we had an easier problem, whereas you social innovators are working in tougher terrain. But what we did just to get a little more detail, we did operationalize and we spent a lot of time thinking about this. We did operationalize our evaluation by saying an idea is innovative if it is creative and going to be useful. Creative and useful were our two kind of benchmarks for innovative ideas in our setting. But the difference was that there was an agreement on like what the ultimate goal was for our problem. Or in the case of, we did another one on circular economy. So the goal was greater amount of reuse. So I think if you can get, and so we haven't tried to do evaluation with LLMs in settings where the values are more mixed like that. But if you could get maybe agreement on the values, I would think that the LLMs might be able to be okay on other dimensions. I'm not sure, but I think it's possible. But again, that's very much work in progress, and like, get back to me in a few months and I'll have more on that. But it actually was shocking to me that this young student from Germany has basically taken GPT 4.0, put the content in, and gotten basically like 75% agreement with the expert raters, which I was astonished by. So it's pretty interesting. Now you have the whole problem of getting everybody to agree on what your endpoint is, and that's much harder. But I think there's a lot of potential for the LLMs of evaluation. Anyway, kind of a circuitous answers. Hope I didn't confuse everyone.
Thank you, Robert. May I chime in, please?
Yes, please go ahead, Helena.
Yeah, thank you, Dilliam. Yeah, so basically, there's a wicked problem. Yeah, that we're unable
Yes.
to address the people to begin with. So thank you very much, Robert, for your sharing on the challenge to overcome that language. The language in asking, not just ChatGPT, but actually in asking the people we are serving. So have we first defined who the people are that we are serving? Do we know who we are serving? Or are we assuming the people are numbers to us, are blocks, are commodities? Have we commoditized them as pawns to be played around with, to be gambled? So that's question number one. So thank you, Steve, for your courageous sharing about the disconnect between benefactors and beneficiaries, despite your numerous decades in serving this industry, in serving the social space, right? And also thank you, Natalie, for your positive spin. Yeah. So let us get real to the problem and the people. So in truth, what we really need to do to address this gap is to get down and dirty with the people, to involve and not just to include them as a statistic, but to engage them and not just to give them empty empowerment, right? So in order to do this, we actually need to have a heart-to-heart conversation with the people, the actual person that I'm going to help, right? It does not require any positive spin. It does not require any negative spin either. It requires an authentic conversation, an authentic relationship with that person, the group of people, the group, the country, or the many geographic locations you want to target, okay? And with this data, we can feed into teaching the AI the language of love to begin with, the language of the people that we are addressing. Okay, so we have collective intelligence in academia, in technology, and of course the humanistic portion of about the people. Okay, so only when we have listened to them and their needs, then we can teach the machine to be human. But first, the human aspect of it has to come from us. We need to value humans. We need to know the dignity of humanity before we can address this with integrity, right? Yeah. So I love MIT Sloan. I've taken class there. So I believe in the technology, in the world's best tech company and world's best tech school. And I do believe that this collaboration can take us on a new path of integrating humanity with dignity, in authenticity, down a road where we can truly bring out the dignity of each person. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Helena. So I think it was really important to hear your perspective on this idea of, empowering people. Like you talked about that it shouldn't be an empty empowerment. So I think that's something important to keep in mind when we're thinking about involving people in solving social issues, solving issues that are important to them. Maybe I'll let Robert respond.
Well, a very eloquent and powerful statement, and a reminder of the, human sort of reality underlying these challenges. And I think it was great to hear. I think that it raises for me interesting questions about, how you can combine, that kind of interaction with, the people who you're, hoping that these interventions can create improvements for, and what modes of interaction with the tools make sense, and what modes of interaction with community groups and with individuals, and it raises all kinds of questions. And it's not just a matter of engaging with these AI tools, but it's a matter, I think, of figuring out mechanisms so that you can have those, I think you used the expression "in the tea," which is that what the expression was? In the TEA? Is that what you said? I thought is that an
I don't know which part.
Okay, maybe I just misheard, but I thought the image that it evoked for me was like, there's an expression of "in the trenches," from World War I, when the soldiers were, in the ditches, shooting at each other. But but it just struck to me, it seemed to me to be sort of a metaphor of like getting really in there with people and really hearing and really listening. And I think that's a very important part of it. And I think that a lot of the design thinking work, aspires, I think, to, getting really in there to understand the stakeholders and engage. And I think that, I think I will take from your comment that, we want to think harder about that part. And then are there ways that, like to use kind of, Steve's idea of like, can we get, these funds in people's, maybe there's some way that technology can be, employed more democratically over the longer term too. And so I think that was a very powerful and eloquent comment, which I'll really take to heart and think hard about, because I think it's a reminder of what this is really about. We're building these tools, we're creating, these layering things on top of these powerful technologies, but ultimately it's about engaging with people, making lives better. And how do you really do that? So I think it's a great comment, and it's one I'll remember.
Thank you, Robert. I hope we can take this beyond remembering to doing, to
No, I
and
hear
taking
you.
it to the next step, developing it together, Robert. I really would love to collaborate with you and MIT Sloan on this. Thank you so much. And these people here who, we can all grow together, and together, with all our collective intelligence, we can make a difference, truly. Thank you. God bless you.
Thanks.
Can I just chime in? Also, this notion of community, right? In my experience with like technological implementations in the communities, quite often the engagement is done sort of as a once-off, at most twice, right? So sometimes I think this it behooves us to really also understand the gaps here, because I think, it's done like that usually because there are limited resources, limited time, and technological projects have usually kind of a deadline for implementation. But what it really assumes is that communities are static, when in fact they are not, right? They are dynamic. And I really like Robert's term of the use mechanism, because what we then really need to do is look at the mechanisms, even at the stage of thinking through the implementation, look at the mechanisms by which community inputs are gathered. And I think the second thing I want to point out is that communities are also quite often transient. It's not always needs gathered in one snapshot will not be needs gathered, say 6 months down the road. So looking at the mechanisms by which we actually include communities, not just in terms of gathering their inputs, but also engaging them to come up with solutions together, I think is really crucial.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, to add, yes, there are always deadlines, we can always keep running on treadmills and say that, yes, we've done this, we've done that, we've done that. But what is the ultimate goal? Have we made a difference? Have we made a difference? Or are we there just to announce that we've done such and such a project, but actually we've not addressed the root causes of it? So perhaps it is a different way of looking at things, a different way of structuring deadlines. To look at deaths instead of deadlines. Deaths as a result of our not doing it. Yeah. All right. Thank you. God bless you.
Thanks, Helena. Thank you, Natalie, for your comments as well. So now I'll just pivot to a different area, a different kind of a question that came up in the chat from Juliet. And her question is, are there particular areas to look into for privacy laws, such as PDPA, when it comes to harnessing collective intelligence?
It's a complicated question.
I could chime in first. Agree that it's complicated. I'm no lawyer, but I do know that especially for those who are vulnerable, they experience privacy very differently. Quite often there's more information about groups and individuals that are vulnerable than others, right? Simply because such information are often required to be offered when they have to apply for grants, when they have to apply for aid and all that. So when it comes to newer technologies, right? I think well, there's a few, I think, levels to this question. The first is when it comes to harnessing collective intelligence that's kind of gathered by newer technologies like generative AI. I do think that it's important to look at the boundaries around that. Absolutely important to ensure that in fact, personal data, personal information that can make certain individuals of communities even more vulnerable there should be hard boundaries around those, right? And even for the AI, in terms of algorithms, in terms of actually the AI generators themselves, I do know that this is something that's being debated, right? In terms of guidelines and I guess to a certain extent, hard boundaries in terms of what can or cannot be used as part of intelligence, right? Especially when it comes to information that can discriminate or that can be used to stereotype certain populations. That's just my take, right? I do think that this is still something that is a work in progress. And yeah, different jurisdictions, different policymakers, they have to figure out what this privacy looks like for their own society, for their own communities.
Thank you,
That's
Natalie.
you raised some great issues. I mean, just to be, I mean, one of the big, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, effectively these large language models have ingested huge amounts of content from many creators, both writers and visual artists, and have created this very powerful tool, but they are reaping all of the benefits, and the creators who generated the content that they're using to create their engine, to make their engine work, are not getting anything. So there's an argument by some of the writers in particular about OpenAI's models that they should be getting compensated for the use of their writing. So there's kind of a, you know, like ability to control, you know, what you created. Natalie mentioned, you know, the potential of AI to discriminate based on, you know, problematic data sets. That's another issue. And I think that the more broad issue just with the internet and collective intelligence is we've slid somewhat unconsciously or not thoughtfully into a world where there's kind of an implicit bargain that you trade off some of your privacy for convenience. And, you know, whether that's a good trade or not, but I mean, a lot of the collective intelligence that's being marshaled in consumer facing spaces is based on that deal, you know, where you kind of sacrifice some of your privacy, but you get, you know, when you go to Netflix, you get your recommendation of what movies you should watch. And that trade-off people, for the most part, seem to be, you know, accepting. But I think that they don't really understand the full dimensions of it. So I think there's a whole lot of issues, not just with collective intelligence, but just with the internet and with internet commerce. And it's a huge topic. So I don't profess to expertise, but I think Natalie may know more than I, and she's said a lot of smart things. So listen to Natalie on this one.
Hi, this is Juliet. So I'm just chiming in on my own question. So basically, just to give a little bit more context, so we've started a social enterprise called Made Without Borders. We're trying to understand sort of what's happening in the homes of families and stuff, you know, families with special needs and things like that. We've been calling in, you know, folks to come in for focus groups, and we've started realizing that when people come in for focus groups, because they're talking about the family dynamic, and their interactions with their mates and stuff like that, we're starting to realize that when we make them sign a PDPA or, a privacy document, saying that, you allow whatever information you say to be used, what we've started realizing is that they're also giving up other people's information. They're giving up, what their sons are doing, what their daughters are doing, and it's starting to make me sort of question, when we're starting to build this and we're trying to techify this entire thing. Right now we're running physical focus groups, so we can put a stop to it, if we say that, okay, no, we don't want this information to be shared. And we don't want to be able to use this information. But then when it comes to when we techify this entire thing, then we would have significantly less controls over what is being shared and what we can do about it. So I'm just, curious as to whether or not anybody has any solutions, to solve a problem like that. And I'm open to any of these suggestions, really.
So tell
Thank you.
more about your hope. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go, Robert, go ahead.
Well, I just was wanting to get more context of then you're hoping to use this data to be able to design interventions or to
So
design programs or.
Essentially what we, can you hear me? Oh, okay. So what we are is essentially, we're trying to get rid of the intermediary, trying to, eliminate financial exploitations of maids. So right now, maids are paying 6 months of their salaries to agents. So we're saying, no, come on board, come on to our global database. So we're almost like a LinkedIn for maids. And then we'll showcase all your skill sets. But what we've also started noticing is that some of the employers are also paying ridiculous sums of money in order to get maids. So what we're doing is we're bringing in employers and maids into this platform. And what we are trying to do is to match them. And then we're taking over some of the services that, agents used to do, which is, apply for work permits and stuff. We ask people to log in via their SingPass. We go into the MOM system directly. We apply for your work permits and stuff. So we're an end-to-end solution, fully integrated. But what we hope to do on the second phase, so this is what we do right now. So, we're just matching employers to mates without the use of agents, and everyone pays significantly less than what they used to pay to agents. But what we are trying to do in phase 2 is that we've noticed that, the tensions and the relationships between the maid-employer dynamic at home. We're trying to figure out how do we solve this problem? How do we make matches better? We know that some maids do very well in certain households and some do disastrously bad. So how do we pick out, personalities and do proper matching, and right now on phase 1, we're just giving more information to the maids, right? We're telling them, okay, this is where you're going to be sleeping, which is information that wouldn't have been otherwise given by, an agent. We're telling them, okay, before you sign the contract, we want your employees to tell you when your days off are and what time you're allowed to be out, that kind of stuff. So we're just trying to provide more clarity and more information just to reduce the resentment. But right now, that's phase 1, reduce resentment. And hoping that we'll improve family harmony from there. But on phase 2, we're really hoping that, can we do some kind of like matching through AI? So we've been running focus groups, trying to understand the dynamics at home, trying to figure things out. And I don't know, I mean, some of the information that's coming out is mind-blowing to a point where some of these are really crimes. And it's like, what do we do with that information?
I could chime in. Thanks, Juliet. Really interesting, actually context scenario. I benefit much from listening to you. I think what you're describing here also is kind of actually, although not quite the same, but similar to some of the challenges surrounding privacy and personal data on the internet. So I actually agree. I really agree with Robert, right, to say that actually, in a way, it also alludes to the larger question of privacy and personal data, or the personal data that's kind of being shared so openly on the internet. And quite often they involve data about others as well. As far as I know, data and actually privacy laws are trying to catch up, right, with all the evolutions that's going on. I mean, in Singapore, we have the PDPA, but in many other countries, right, governance and legislations around personal data is also being debated and new laws are being formed. To a certain extent, right, I think also, right, our thinking around how we manage personal data needs to go from being consent-based only to being accountability-based, right? So it does mean that it doesn't mean that we don't get consent, we do, right? But also as data controllers, and this definition of data controllers, I really mean anyone, any entity that collects data, including yourself, right? Your group. Data controllers do need to also kind of apply perhaps some judgment in terms of what to include, what not to include, even if the participants have given consent. In cases where data may harm themselves or harm others, I do think that data controllers have to apply this principle of accountability, perhaps not to even include, in any kind of collective intelligence innovations. That's my sense. But yeah, I mean, I also think that a lot of actually what we learn about media ethics also apply here as well in terms of how we actually exercise such judgment. Just my take, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
if I may just chime in as
Yes.
well, in the especially in the social impact space, and this is an ongoing issue, and there's always a tension, isn't there, where you want to protect privacy as much as possible, especially when it comes to very sensitive information about vulnerable communities, and at the same time, you need the data and you need the evidence to create that effective solution. So I don't have an answer, but from a evidence-based, data-driven solutioning entity like mine, we love data, we love more evidence, we love the sensitive, intricate information, and of course we have our own IRB that does everything we possibly can to protect privacy, but my job is to probe. So there's always this tension, isn't there? And I know that once you put it on collective intelligence, once you put it on the internet, there's some real privacy issues as well. So I think it's a constant tension that we must address and recognize that it has a tension. And sometimes a little less privacy may have some strong payoff in terms of knowledge-based solutioning. And when it comes to collective intelligence, I think that's always going to be an issue. So I don't have the answer, but I do want to say that sensitive information like your collecting that you mentioned is actually very important. And so I hope that we can govern this well, and at the same time get the data that we need. A very simple example, and it's probably not a very good one, is when I go on a Google search on a food review in Singapore or somewhere, and it's very silly, but my own bias is I want to see what the Singaporeans are reviewing when it's food or something, because our standards are so our particular standard is known to us, and that's a loss of privacy, isn't it? There's a collective intelligence, but you want to know, okay, who's saying it, what's the source, and for me the source is actually very important when it comes to solutioning ideas, so on and so forth. So I don't have an answer, but I'd love to hear the rest input on this as well.
Also, it sounds like an amazing project, I just have to say. It sounds like you were doing the same thing that we were trying to do in a corporate set, like we were trying to match employers and employees, and that's exactly what you're doing. So it sounds fascinating. I'm going to go to your website and try and learn more.
Thank you. So I'm mindful of the time. So I think we have probably time for one last question. Singing from Eka Family Foundation has raised her hand, so I'd like to invite her to share her question.
Hello. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think my question is about the Supermind ideator. I think it's very interesting, and I think I'm curious about, because it takes information from ChatGPT, and also special language and rules are also adapted for the platform, right? I was just wondering how much of the language or rules takes into account the voices or the language of the, let's say, the poverty community that Steve mentioned, or let's say the third world communities. Because if we talk about wicked problems that the platform is trying to solve, let's say, for example, for a certain language, right? In the Western language, like authoritarian state is probably very negative, has a negative connotation. But in certain countries like Middle East or even Africa, that could actually be their day-to-day life, and they will need certain solutions that could not look at authoritarian state in a negative light, but instead look at it as a way to solve the problem and then generate solutions that is more contextualized. I guess same for rules as well. When we talk about community solutioning, specific rules need to be applied. I think the way they approach a solution is very different from how government approach solutions. So government needs to kind of like set up boundaries, who can receive certain aids and who cannot. But when it comes to community, people aid each other in a different way. So I was wondering if the platform takes the language or the rules of certain communities, or it's still pretty much academic driven, or what people who have access to the internet feeds information into this platform.
Well, you quite rightly are recognizing a potential pitfall of the out-of-the-box language model. It's based on ingesting content from the internet, and so the biases and tendencies of that content are going to shape the outputs that you get. So you're identifying a potential issue. One thing that we have explored to try to mediate that is that you can feed into Ideator content that will give you more context about the situation at hand. So, for example, one of our researchers is working with some U.S. government officials who are trying to figure out what to do about and this is actually maybe potentially very germane to your example. Haiti at the moment, I don't know if it's in the news in Singapore, but the country of Haiti the government has been overthrown by urban gangs in the capital, and the United States has brokered an agreement with, I think, Kenya to bring in troops to try to restore order. So one of our researchers actually found a number of U.S. government documents. He fed them into Ideator so that it would have a better understanding of the context of Haiti. Similarly, if you were working in a country where maybe restoring order was important and the connotations of authoritarian government were in fact, because of that, more positive than they might be in, say, the US, you could do some kind of tweaking of the baseline ideator by feeding it in some content. So we haven't done much of that, but I think it's possible. But you're rightly pointing out a problem with, all of these generative AI tools is that they're based on the content that they've been fed. And if the content that they've been fed is a mismatch with your context that you're working in, you need to be aware of that. And then there may be some ways that you can address it. But it's something that we've tried a little tiny bit, and it seems to show some promise. But you're very rightly pointing out a challenge of these things, because they're kind of like plain vanilla. And if your context is one where the plain vanilla large language model is going to be problematic, then you have to be very cautious.
Then
That
I
make
think,
sense?
yes, that makes sense. I guess as you're talking, I was wondering if a solution could actually be to engage the communities, we get their input and how they would think about certain problems, like say, let's say the one that you just mentioned, right? And then how would another representative from another community actually solve these problems? And we could feed that into the data. I think I might,
that's brilliant. No, you elicit inputs from the community members who are affected and use that to tune the ideator. I think that's a brilliant idea. I like that a lot. It hadn't occurred to me, but yeah, totally.
yeah, like let's say if we go on the ground and say like, what are they doing instead, right? And then we use
Right.
their practices as future examples. Yeah.
Yep, I love it. I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea. So instead of eliciting the information from the official government documents, as my colleague did, you actually go to the setting, you get the people there to tell you what, give their perspectives. And this is another case where maybe there are actually some ways where, you can actually do tape recordings and then the recording can transcribe the content and you can very quickly generate a corpus of content that could actually be the voice of the, people in the community that you're trying to intervene in. So I think that's a super interesting idea.
Yeah, that's exactly how voices are heard if you talk about recording. Yeah. Yeah,
What?
that's exactly how voices are being heard if we talk about
Okay.
recordings. Yeah.
Okay, so then you're getting recording and transcripts, and I mean, I really like that idea. I mean, I think that's really cool, potentially. And I hadn't occurred to us. Again, we're a little bit in our tech bubble, but I think you guys are bringing some really great things to the fore here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Singing, for your question. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody. If anyone needs to leave now, please feel free. But I would like to just highlight the other two questions that came in on in the chat, and then invite Robert to maybe share his last thoughts if there's if there's time. So the two questions were how can we use collective intelligence and AI to foster empathy in the policymaking process? So maybe this is something that you'd be able to speak to, Robert. And the other one is also about how can we reconcile the process of sourcing collective intelligence and the opportunity to monetize the commercial benefit such ideas might get?
Well, I
So
think that
very
the first
different
one, I don't have a sort of high level answer, but it's actually something I'd like to type into Ideator and see what Ideator says and maybe try it out.
It's good.
Because I don't have an initial intuitive idea. I think Raj's question. So I think that's a cool question, and I want to think about that one some more. And I may, if I get some great results from Ideator, Shariel, I'll look you up and send you the results. The other one I think is that Raj is sort of raising. I do think is getting at this larger issue of just internet data and like extraction of data and then monetization and I think that Natalie's made some fruitful comments about some of the perils of that and some of the tensions, but I think that we and I think you're probably asking a more specific question about just the hold on a second, I just made the question disappear. I think you're asking a larger question here about like, if we have something like Ideator that generates ideas, then how does that get, sort of commercialized? And then there may be some, tensions there between who's putting the ideas out there and then who's benefiting. And so that's kind of a larger, like basically all the writers everybody who's put content into the internet has put collective intelligence that OpenAI is extracting and generating like billions of dollars for the people at OpenAI. Well, there's somewhat of a disconnect there. So that's one of these tensions that we have in these internet-based worlds. But more, I'm a little bit more with the tools that we're trying to develop. I mean, I think that our hope is that the people who are using our tools are the stakeholders who are engaged and are hoping to, apply the generative AI and the Supermind design combination to address the problems that they're facing, and that they'll be able to be the ones who benefit. I mean, I don't think again, though, this is maybe a case where we're being too naive about, maybe people will be exploitatively using Ideator in ways that we don't envision, and maybe we need to be thinking harder about those possibilities. But we are envisioning a model of, stakeholders who have an interest in solving a problem using our tools, and then taking those things and then benefiting from their use themselves. So that's our sort of default vision. But I think you guys have been good at pointing out that we're maybe a little too optimistic, and we need to be thinking a little bit more about some things that are a little bit darker. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that you're pushing that, but I think you're raising important issues that maybe we have not thought about as much as we ought.
Thank you so much, Robert. So since we're at time, I mean, I just wanted to thank you so much, Robert, for taking the time to speak to us, to share your insights, and to be so open with all the diversity of the questions that came up today. So any last closing remarks?
Well, I just have to say this session has been fantastic for me, and I think I've gotten many really interesting specific ideas, and the range of perspectives has been incredibly valuable. So I'm super grateful to you for the invitation, and super grateful to everyone for the very stimulating conversation. So I'm the one who's thankful.
Thank you. Steve and Natalie, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, just to thank Robert and to say, keep going, don't stop. Innovation is just like that, right? We find so many twists and turns, but we plow ahead, because I think what you're trying to achieve is extremely important. And I think it will, in the end, increase a lot of empathy when it comes to policymaking and solutioning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Natalie, anything to add? Okay, maybe she's away from her screen. So thank you so much, Robert. I really think that the Supermind Ideator is game-changing, and we're really looking forward to seeing the development over the next few years. So thank you for sharing, and thank you everybody in the audience for attending. Just wanted to invite anyone who'd like to attend the October conference to check out the Future Ready Society website for information on how to register. So once again, this has been brought to you by ToteBot, LKYCIC, and IPS, and we hope everybody has a great day. And good night to Robert. Thanks for staying
Thank you
up.
so much, everyone.
Good
Have a
night.
good
Thank you,
day.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.